What if everything Meghan Markle had fought for, everything she had dreamed of for her children, crumbled before her eyes in one single moment? Imagine sitting in a sunlit California mansion, thousands of miles away from the royal palace you once called home, and hearing the words that forever shut the door on your children's future. Not whispered in secret, not hinted at in passing, but spoken publicly, officially, and broadcast live across the world. That is exactly what happened when King Charles delivered his decision on the titles of Archie, Harrison, and Lilibet Diana. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The scene was surreal. Britain tuned in, the Commonwealth listened with anticipation, and America, the land where Meghan had tried to reinvent her royal fairy tale, sat at the edge of its seat. People expected diplomacy. They expected vague promises wrapped in polished palace language. But what they got was a thunderbolt, a royal decree that carried the weight of centuries. A single announcement that Meghan Markle herself had feared for years. Archie and Lilibet would not be granted titles. The dream she had fought for, the validation, the crown-touched recognition, was gone in an instant. Why does this matter? Because this isn't just about two children. This is about power. It's about legacy. It's about whether Meghan Markle's carefully crafted identity as a royal outsider could ever secure her place in history, or whether she would forever be remembered as a woman shut out of the monarchy. And here's the twist. King Charles didn't just close the door. He locked it. He threw away the key. But before we get there, let's rewind. Because to understand why this announcement shook the world, you need to know the story behind it. Meghan's fight for titles wasn't just about her children. It was about herself. About proving she belonged. About taking what she believed Diana would have wanted for her grandchildren. About finally silencing the critics who called her an actress playing princess. But as we peel back the layers, as we examine what Charles really meant when he said those words, you'll see that this nightmare was years in the making. Think back to that fateful day in 2020 when Harry and Meghan stunned the world by stepping back from royal duties. At the time, they insisted they wanted freedom. They wanted independence. But independence came with a cost. Stripped of official royal roles, they were also stripped of protections, privileges, and the full embrace of the monarchy. The question lingered. What would that mean for their children? Would the sins of the parents, as some saw it, be visited upon Archie and Lilibet? Or would Charles, as grandfather and monarch, extend his hand in reconciliation? For years, speculation swirled. Royal commentators debated endlessly. Some argued that Charles, keen to slim down the monarchy, would cut off Harry's branch entirely. Others believed the king, guided by his softer side, would recognize the children for the sake of unity. Meghan, meanwhile, played her cards carefully. She hinted in interviews, she suggested in documentaries, she cried in front of cameras. Every time she spoke of Archie or Lilibet, the subtext was clear. She wanted the titles. Not for herself. She always framed it as protection for her children, but the world knew better. And then came the announcement. Live. Official. Final. King Charles didn't mince words. He addressed the matter head-on, a rare move for a monarch who typically dances around controversy. The effect was seismic. Imagine Meghan's face as the cameras rolled. Imagine Harry's silence as the statement echoed across continents. A nightmare playing out in real time. Let's pause for a moment. Why do titles matter so much? Isn't it just a name, a formality, a piece of pomp from an outdated system? On the surface, perhaps. But titles in the royal world are currency. They bring access, influence, protection, and prestige. Without them, Archie and Lilibet are not royal heirs. They're private citizens, stripped of the aura Meghan so desperately wanted to pass on. And for Meghan, who has spent years branding herself as half Hollywood, half royal, the loss of that royal seal is devastating. It undercuts her narrative, shatters her leverage, and exposes her deepest fear, that she will never truly belong. And yet, the irony here is thick. Meghan once claimed she left the monarchy to protect her children from its constraints. She painted titles as shackles. And now, years later, she was fighting tooth and nail to secure the very titles she once dismissed. Contradiction? Absolutely. But contradictions have always been part of Meghan's story. Picture this. Meghan and Harry in Montecito, sipping coffee, preparing for another media project, when the alert flashes across their screens. King Charles rules out titles for Archie and Lilibet. Harry frozen. Meghan in disbelief. The nightmare has arrived. The British tabloids went into overdrive. Headlines screamed betrayal. Some painted Charles as ruthless, others as decisive. Social media split in two. Supporters of Meghan cried foul, claiming racism and bias. Supporters of the crown applauded Charles for drawing a line. And through it all, the children, two innocent souls caught in a web of palace politics, became the faces of the storm. Now, let's be clear. This wasn't just a symbolic snub. Charles's announcement has real-world consequences. Without titles, Archie and Lilibet lack the diplomatic protections extended to royal children. Without titles, they lose standing in succession debates. Without titles, Meghan loses her strongest bargaining chip in the ongoing battle for public sympathy. For Meghan, this wasn't just a nightmare. It was the collapse of her entire royal strategy. Do you see the tragedy? Do you feel the weight? This wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration. A declaration that Harry and Meghan's branch of the royal tree would forever remain separate, trimmed back, and contained. And the fact that Charles made it official, on air, with the world watching, gave it an added sting. There was no room for negotiation, no room for spin, no room for Meghan to reinterpret his words in her favor. But here's the question, why now? Why would Charles choose this moment, of all times, to slam the door shut? Was it pressure from Camilla? Influence from William? Or was it Charles's own desire to protect the crown from what he saw as outsiders trying to cash in? These are the questions that ignite curiosity. And as we dig deeper into each chapter, the answers will reveal not. Was this all inevitable from the very beginning? Could Meghan Markle and Prince Harry ever have truly secured the titles for Archie and Lilibet, or was the royal machine always going to push them to the sidelines? Think about it. The moment Harry and Meghan broke free from the gilded cage of the monarchy, they weren't just walking away from family dinners at Buckingham Palace. They were walking away from centuries of tradition, centuries of protocol, and most importantly, centuries of unwritten rules that no outsider could ever bend. And yet, Meghan thought she could. From the very start, Meghan positioned herself as different. She wasn't like the others. She was modern, American, outspoken, an actress with her own voice. She claimed she brought fresh energy to the monarchy. But here's the contradiction. While she often criticized the rigid system of titles, hierarchy, and outdated customs, she simultaneously craved the legitimacy those very titles could bring. Isn't that fascinating? On one hand, she mocked the monarchy for being archaic. On the other hand, she desperately wanted her children to be stamped with its golden seal. So let's rewind. Remember that iconic interview with Oprah? Meghan, sitting in the lush Californian garden, eyes glistening, declaring that Archie was denied the title of prince. She framed it as cruelty, as racism, as proof that the palace had never embraced her. And yet, royal historians pointed out something curious. Archie wasn't denied anything at all. By rules set long ago by King George V, only the grandchildren of a monarch automatically become prince or princess. At the time of Archie's birth, Charles was not yet king. The titles were never his to claim. But Meghan's narrative, that the palace deliberately excluded Archie, took root. Now, fast forward to today, King Charles has officially made his decision. Archie and Lilibet will not be granted those titles, even though the rules technically allow it now that he is king. Meghan's nightmare came true. But was this decision a sudden blow, or simply the natural conclusion of a story that began years ago? Imagine Meghan, watching the tides of royal tradition crash against her every move. She wanted freedom, yes, but she also wanted recognition. She wanted the glamour of Hollywood, but she also wanted the gravitas of Windsor. She wanted the crown, without the cage. Isn't that the ultimate contradiction? And this is where the inevitability comes in. Because no matter how hard Meghan tried to rewrite the script, the monarchy is not a Hollywood production. It doesn't bend to dramatic plot twists or carefully curated Netflix documentaries. The monarchy plays the long game. Silent, patient, ruthless when it needs to be. And for Charles, granting titles to Meghan's children wasn't just about being a kind grandfather. It was about preserving the integrity of the institution. Think about the optics. A slimmed-down monarchy has been Charles's vision for decades. Fewer working royals, less public money spent, a tighter circle. And who sits at the center of that circle? William, Kate, and their 3 children. That's the future. That's the image Charles wants the world to see. Archie and Lilibet? In Montecito, surrounded by Hollywood executives, celebrity neighbors, and lucrative media deals? That doesn't fit the plan. Do you see where this is going? From the very beginning, Meghan and Harry were writing a script that could never end the way they wanted. They believed they could live in California, brand themselves as global icons, and still reap the benefits of royal prestige. But the monarchy is not a part-time gig. It's all in or nothing at all. And Charles made that crystal clear when he denied Archie and Lilibet their titles. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Meghan, in her own words, once said she didn't care about titles. In fact, she claimed she wanted Archie to live a normal life, free from the constraints of being a prince. That sounds noble, doesn't it? But then, why fight so hard for the very thing you claimed you didn't want? Was it really about Archie's freedom, or was it about Meghan's status? Let's not forget, titles open doors. They guarantee security. They guarantee influence. They guarantee a level of respect in international circles that even the most famous Hollywood stars can't command. Meghan knows this. And deep down, so does Harry. Which is why, despite their public rejection of the monarchy, they never stopped quietly lobbying for their children's recognition. And yet, as Charles stood there, speaking those fateful words, all of Meghan's carefully built strategies unraveled. This wasn't just rejection. It was humiliation. It was the monarchy telling her, in front of the entire world, you don't belong. Your children don't belong. The crown does not recognize you. Now, imagine the ripple effects of that moment. Meghan, who once proudly said she married the man, not the institution, is now faced with the brutal reality that without the institution, the man, and the children, are just ordinary people. The titles were the bridge between her Hollywood persona and her royal identity. And Charles just burned that bridge to the ground. Here's a provocative question. Could Meghan have played this differently? Could she have secured the titles if she had remained loyal, silent, dutiful? Or was she doomed from the start? Because if history teaches us anything, it's that the monarchy has little tolerance for rebellion. Just ask Edward VIII, who abdicated for love and was exiled to a life of glamorous irrelevance. Sound familiar? And here's where the story twists again. While Charles's decision seemed final, some insiders whisper that it wasn't made purely out of cold strategy. Some say it was personal. That Charles had grown weary of Meghan's constant public criticisms, weary of Harry's tell-all interviews, weary of seeing the monarchy dragged into Netflix deals and podcast scripts. Was this Charles's revenge? His way of saying, you wanted freedom, now you've got it completely? For Meghan, the sting wasn't just in losing the titles. The sting was in losing control of the narrative. She could spin interviews. She could direct documentaries. But she could not spin the words of the king, spoken live, broadcast across the globe. So I ask you, was this all inevitable? Was Meghan's dream always doomed to collapse? Or could she, in another timeline, have secured the fairy tale ending she craved? The contradictions in her journey make it hard to know for sure. But one thing is clear. King Charles has drawn a line in the sand, and Meghan is on the wrong side of it. And yet, this is only the beginning. Because while the titles may be denied, the war for public opinion has just begun. Meghan is not the type to retreat quietly. She is not the type to accept defeat. And as whispers spread of what she said and did behind the scenes after Charles's announcement, one thing becomes clear. The fallout is going to be explosive. What drives a king to choose history over his own blood? Was this Charles acting as a monarch or as a father? That's the question that has gripped the world ever since he uttered those fateful words on air. Because while the decision to deny Archie and Lilibet titles felt like a hammer blow against Meghan, it was also a window into the storm raging behind palace walls. This wasn't just a grandfather making a call about his grandchildren. This was a monarch weighing centuries of tradition, the survival of the crown, and the simmering tensions that had been eating away at the royal family for years. Step into Charles's shoes for a moment. Imagine the weight he carries. Every monarch since George V has been tasked not just with ruling, but with preserving the mystique of the monarchy itself. And Charles, long criticized as weak, indecisive, even irrelevant, knew he had to make his reign count. How do you do that? By making bold choices that carve your legacy into stone. For Charles, slimming down the monarchy wasn't just a plan, it was a mission. But slimming down means cutting off branches. And whose branch looked the most expendable? Harry's. Behind the velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace, there were whispers long before Charles's coronation. Senior courtiers debated whether Archie and Lilibet should be elevated. Some argued that denying them would look cruel, that it would feed Meghan's narrative of victimhood. Others countered that granting them titles would be like rewarding betrayal. After all, hadn't Harry and Meghan publicly accused the royal family of racism? Hadn't they sold their story to Netflix, pocketing millions while dragging the monarchy through the mud? Why should those same children benefit from an institution their parents had worked so hard to undermine? This was the dilemma Charles faced. As a father, perhaps he wanted reconciliation. As a king, he couldn't risk looking weak. And so, in that critical moment on air, Charles didn't speak as Grandpa. He spoke as Your Majesty. And yet, the irony is sharp. Charles has always been haunted by family fractures. His own marriage to Diana was a battlefield. His strained relationship with his sons has been tabloid fodder for decades. If anyone understood the pain of broken bonds, it was Charles. But when forced to choose, he chose the crown over compassion. Some insiders say the push came from Camilla. The Queen Consort has long been wary of Meghan. Two women married into the royal machine, but with vastly different outcomes. Camilla played the long game. Decades of silence, slow rehabilitation, and quiet loyalty to Charles. Meghan, by contrast, stormed the palace gates, demanded change overnight, and when rebuffed, set fire to the bridges she had barely crossed. Was it Camilla whispering in Charles's ear that granting Meghan's children titles would erode the crown's dignity? That by elevating Archie and Lilibet, Charles would essentially be rewarding rebellion? And then there's William. Don't underestimate the influence of the heir. William has watched his younger brother tear through the monarchy's reputation like a wrecking ball. He has endured the tell-all books, the interviews, the accusations. To him, allowing Archie and Lilibet to hold titles would be a slap in the face to the institution he has dedicated his life to protect. Insiders say William made his stance clear. No titles for Harry's children. To grant them would be to compromise the monarchy's future. So here's the contradiction. Charles wanted to be remembered as the king who modernized the monarchy, who made it more streamlined, more relatable. But modernizing meant making brutal cuts, and those cuts fell hardest on his own grandchildren. Now picture the palace in the hours leading up to the announcement. The courtiers scurrying, drafting statements, debating language. Should Charles soften the blow with vague wording? Should he leave the door open for future reconsideration? Or should he deliver the decision with clarity so sharp it could not be spun? In the end, he chose clarity. And when the cameras rolled, he didn't just imply or suggest. He declared. That single declaration shifted the narrative instantly. For Meghan, it was confirmation of her worst fears. For Harry, it was another wedge driven between him and his family. For William and Camilla, it was victory. And for Charles, it was power reclaimed. But let's dig deeper. Why would Charles take this risk now, knowing the backlash it would provoke? The timing is everything. With the monarchy still reeling from the loss of Queen Elizabeth, Charles knew he had to assert authority quickly. He couldn't afford to look indecisive in the early years of his reign. Denying Archie and Lilibet titles was his way of drawing a line in the sand, of saying to the world, "This is my monarchy now, and this is how it will be run." Think about how different this is from Elizabeth's style. The late queen was famous for her never complain, never explain approach. She avoided confrontation, preferring to let time smooth over scandal. Charles, by contrast, is proving himself willing to be direct, even confrontational. It's a gamble, but one he seems determined to make. And yet, beneath the royal robes, the father in Charles must have felt the sting. Imagine looking at photographs of Archie and Lilibet, innocent faces who never chose this fight, and knowing your decision would define their lives. Imagine Meghan's rage, Harry's silence, the public storm. Charles chose history over family, but did it cost him his soul? This is where the contradictions pile up. Charles has always spoken about wanting to be a caring grandfather. He's been photographed doting on George, Charlotte, and Louis. He has spoken warmly of children and grandchildren. And yet, when it came to Archie and Lilibet, he withheld the one thing that would have bound them to the monarchy forever. Ask yourself, Is this strength or cruelty? Is this Charles finally stepping into the role of a decisive monarch, or a man punishing his son by using his grandchildren as collateral? The build-up to this decision reveals even more. Sources say there were months of secret meetings, late-night phone calls, and bitter arguments behind palace walls. Advisors warned of Meghan's inevitable backlash. They predicted interviews, memoirs, perhaps even lawsuits. Charles listened, but in the end, he said one thing: the monarchy is bigger than any one person. That became the guiding principle. Bigger than Harry, bigger than Meghan, bigger, even, than Archie and Lilibet. And so, the king chose duty. But duty, as history shows, often comes at a brutal cost. The world is left to wonder, what price will Charles pay for this choice? Will history hail him as the king who protected the crown from scandal, or condemn him as the grandfather who turned his back on two children? As the announcement rippled across the globe, Meghan's nightmare was confirmed. But behind closed doors, something even more chilling was taking place. Because while the public saw a king making a statement, Meghan saw something far darker, a palace plot designed not just to deny titles, but to erase her family from the royal story altogether. And when she discovered who was pulling the strings, her rage reached a level that even Harry had never seen before. Because what came next wasn't just a decision. It was a revelation that would turn this family feud into a full-blown war. How does an image shatter in an instant? How does someone who built an entire identity around being the new Diana suddenly find that mirror smashed into pieces? That's exactly what happened to Meghan Markle the moment King Charles made his decision on air. Because for years, Meghan leaned on a powerful narrative, that she was walking in the footsteps of Diana, that she was carrying her torch, and that her children would inherit Diana's spirit through royal titles and recognition. But when Charles cut those titles off, the illusion collapsed. The new Diana storyline no longer held. Let's dig into this. From the very first moment Meghan entered the royal scene, comparisons to Diana were unavoidable. The British press couldn't resist drawing parallels between the young, glamorous outsider who married into the royal family in the 1980s and the modern, glamorous American actress who captured Prince Harry's heart decades later. Meghan herself didn't shy away from these comparisons. In interviews, she leaned on the idea of being misunderstood, of being hounded by the press, of being crushed by the firm. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar? Harry only deepened the connection. He repeatedly invoked his mother's memory, framing Meghan as Diana's spiritual successor, the one who would complete what Diana started, challenging tradition, humanizing the monarchy, bringing compassion into an institution that often seemed cold and mechanical. It was a powerful narrative, one that resonated deeply with people still mourning Diana. One that made Meghan look like more than just an actress turned duchess. It made her look like destiny. But here's the contradiction. Diana never needed to beg for recognition. Diana never had to fight for titles. Diana's children were born princes because of who they were in the line of succession. Meghan, by contrast, has been fighting tooth and nail to secure those honors for Archie and Lilibet. And when Charles's words came crashing down, the comparison Meghan had clung to for years unraveled before the world's eyes. Ask yourself this: can you still call yourself the new Diana if the crown itself refuses to grant your children the very titles Diana's children carried with ease? The irony is brutal. Diana's sons were princes from birth. Meghan's children, despite all her maneuvering, are not. That contrast is a dagger to Meghan's carefully crafted image. Now imagine the emotional fallout. Meghan watching the broadcast, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. Every word Charles spoke was not just a rejection of her children. It was a rejection of her narrative. She had painted herself as the victim, the warrior, the heir to Diana's legacy. But Charles's decision exposed a truth Meghan had long tried to conceal. She wasn't Diana. She wasn't even close. She was an outsider fighting for a place the monarchy had no intention of giving her. And here's where the surprising twist comes in. While Meghan's supporters rushed to social media to declare the decision cruel, a growing number of voices began to question the Diana narrative itself. They pointed out that Diana never weaponized her children's titles. That Diana, for all her battles with the palace, never tried to set herself apart by rewriting the rules. Meghan, by contrast, was now seen as someone desperate to hold on to titles she had once claimed she didn't care about. The contradiction was glaring. The illusion was fading. The irony grew even sharper when you looked at Diana's real legacy. Diana's power came not from her title, but from her humanity. She didn't need a crown to win hearts. She had authenticity, vulnerability, and a genuine connection to people. Meghan, however, built her power on controlling narratives, producing documentaries, and curating an image. Authenticity? That was always in question. And when Charles's decree hit the airwaves, it was as if the world collectively saw the difference for the first time. Do you see the emotional sting? Meghan's nightmare wasn't just about Archie and Lilibet losing titles. It was about her losing Diana's shadow. Without that shadow, her claim to moral authority crumbles. Without that comparison, she's just another ex-royal, another celebrity hustling for relevance in Hollywood. But Meghan, of course, wouldn't take this lying down. Insiders say she immediately began plotting her counterattack. She called allies in the media. She sketched out plans for interviews where she could once again invoke Diana's name, framing Charles's decision as proof of cruelty, proof that Diana's grandchildren were being punished in her absence. But here's the problem. The more Meghan invoked Diana, the more hollow it sounded. You can only ride a legend's coattails for so long before the truth catches up. And here's the ultimate twist. It wasn't just Charles's words that shattered Meghan's Diana narrative. It was the reaction of Harry himself. For years, Harry defended Meghan by linking her to Diana, arguing that history was repeating itself. But after Charles's announcement, something in Harry reportedly shifted. Sources close to the palace suggest Harry began questioning whether this comparison had done more harm than good. Was Meghan really Diana's successor, or was she using Diana as a shield to deflect criticism? That question stings, doesn't it? Because if even Harry begins to doubt the comparison, then Meghan loses the one person whose validation mattered most. Let's not forget, Harry's loyalty to Diana has always been absolute. She was his anchor, his guiding light. And if Charles's decision forced him to see that Meghan wasn't living up to that legacy, then the cracks in their marriage may be deeper than anyone realized. Imagine the heartbreak, the fights behind closed doors, the accusations. Harry torn between the woman he loves and the memory of the mother he lost. Meghan insisting she is carrying on Diana's fight. Harry quietly wondering if Diana would have agreed. So here we are. A decision about titles has become something much bigger. It has become the breaking point for Meghan's most powerful narrative. It has exposed contradictions she can't spin away. It has forced Harry to confront uncomfortable truths. And it has reminded the world that Diana was in a league of her own. But here's the real cliffhanger. Meghan may have lost the Diana comparison in the eyes of the public, but she isn't done. She has other strategies, other weapons, other secrets she's been holding on to. And as her anger boiled over after Charles's announcement, she began preparing to unleash a counterstrike so bold, so shocking, that even the palace wasn't ready for it. Because what Meghan did next wasn't just about titles. It was about survival. And her move would leave Charles, William, and even Harry reeling in disbelief. What came next would push this royal feud into dangerous new territory, and it would change the story forever. What happens when children become symbols in a war they never chose? That's the tragic reality facing Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana. Two innocent souls, barely old enough to understand the weight of their last names, suddenly thrust into a global debate about power, betrayal, and identity. Charles's decision didn't just deny them titles, it rewrote their place in history. And Meghan's nightmare wasn't only about humiliation. It was about watching her children become the collateral damage of a royal feud. Let's rewind to the very beginning. Archie's birth in 2019 was supposed to be a moment of unity, a fresh chapter for the monarchy. Instead, it was shrouded in secrecy, confusion, and suspicion. Remember how Meghan and Harry broke tradition by refusing the traditional hospital photo on the steps of the Lindo wing? Instead, they chose privacy, issuing carefully staged photographs days later. At the time, the couple said they wanted to protect their son. But to many in Britain, it felt like a deliberate snub of royal tradition. That was the first crack, the first sign that Meghan and Harry would not play by the rules. Then came the whispers, questions about Archie's birth certificate, rumors of surrogacy, tabloid headlines that fueled a storm of conspiracy theories. Whether true or not, those whispers followed Archie from the moment he took his first breath. And Meghan, who insisted she was protecting her child from scrutiny, somehow found herself amplifying it by fighting battles in public. The contradictions piled up. She wanted privacy, but she signed deals that put her family front and center on Netflix. She wanted protection, but she rejected the institution that could provide it. And through it all, Archie's name became entangled in controversy. Then came Lilibet. Born in California, far from Buckingham Palace, her very name was a statement. Lilibet was Elizabeth II's private family nickname, a name sacred within royal circles. Meghan and Harry claimed it was a tribute. Critics claimed it was an appropriation, an attempt to cling to royal legitimacy, even while living thousands of miles away. From the very moment of her birth, Lilibet was a symbol of the couple's contradictions, rejecting the monarchy publicly while tying themselves to it privately. Do you see the pattern here? Both children were born into controversy, not by their own choice, but by the decisions of their parents. And when Charles announced that Archie and Lilibet would not receive titles, it cemented their fate. No royal status, no official protection, no recognition from the institution their parents had spent years attacking. Now here's the emotional gut punch. For Meghan, these children were supposed to be her legacy. In her mind, titles for Archie and Lilibet weren't just about names, they were about validation. They were proof that she had carved a permanent place in royal history. Without those titles, Meghan's children are not princes or princesses. They are private citizens. And for someone who has built her entire image on royal status, that is devastating. But what about Harry? How does a father process this? Imagine the pain of knowing your children will not carry the same honors you were born with. Imagine the guilt of realizing your choices, your interviews, your books, your relentless criticisms may have directly cost your children their birthright. That's the burden Harry now carries. And insiders say it's tearing him apart. On one hand, he wants to support Meghan, to stand by her in this war against the palace. On the other, he sees the consequences of that war etched onto the futures of his children. How long before that tension cracks him open? Here's a provocative thought. Were Archie and Lilibet ever really meant to be royals? Or were they destined to be pawns in a chess game much bigger than themselves? From the moment Meghan and Harry stepped back from royal duties, the die was cast. Children of working royals are one thing. Children of exiled celebrities are another. And Charles made that distinction clear. By denying them titles, he has sent a message that resonates across generations. The monarchy will not reward rebellion. And yet, the cruelty of this decision is undeniable. Can children really be blamed for the actions of their parents? Should Archie and Lilibet grow up bearing the punishment of a feud they had no part in? These are the questions that have ignited debate across the world. Some argue Charles is protecting the institution. Others say he is punishing innocence. Which side are you on? Let's look at the contradictions again. Meghan says she wanted to shield her children from royal constraints, but now she weeps because they are denied titles. She says the monarchy was toxic, yet she fought to bind her children to it. She says she left Britain to protect her family, yet she dragged them into the global spotlight through Netflix deals and interviews. Every choice, every statement, seems to circle back on itself. And at the center of that circle are Archie and Lilibet, two children who never asked for any of this. Imagine their future. Growing up in California, going to American schools, surrounded by celebrity culture, yet forever carrying the Windsor name. Without titles, they will always be half in and half out. Royal blood, but no royal recognition. Do you think that won't affect them? Of course it will. Children are perceptive. They will hear the whispers. They will read the headlines. One day, they will ask why George, Charlotte, and Louis were princes and princesses, but they were not. And what will Harry and Meghan say then? The tragedy is this. Archie and Lilibet didn't just lose titles. They lost identity. They lost the chance to belong fully to either world. Not fully royal. Not fully ordinary. Suspended in the limbo their parents created. And Meghan knows it. That's why Charles's announcement hit her like a thunderbolt. Because it wasn't just the loss of titles. It was the loss of the narrative she wanted to pass down. But here's the twist. This story isn't over. Because behind closed doors, Meghan reportedly erupted after Charles's decision. She accused palace insiders of conspiring against her children, of rewriting history to erase them. She saw the fingerprints of Camilla, the shadow of William, and the silent approval of courtiers who had long despised her. And she vowed that if the palace was going to deny her children recognition, then she would create recognition on her own terms. What does that mean? Think about it. Meghan's greatest weapon has always been the media. If the monarchy won't crown her children with titles, she can crown them with public sympathy. She can frame them as victims of a cruel system, denied their rightful place because of prejudice and politics. And in Hollywood, that narrative sells. That narrative stirs hearts, wins interviews, secures deals. Titles or not, Meghan will find a way to keep her children in the story. But here's the danger. The more Meghan fights this war, the more Archie and Lilibet become tools in a battle they never chose. Every headline, every documentary, every interview deepens the burden they will one day inherit. Meghan thinks she's protecting them, but is she really protecting herself? And this brings us to the cliffhanger. Because while Meghan was raging in Montecito, while Harry was torn between guilt and anger, palace insiders were already moving forward with their next step. A step that would not only reinforce Charles's decision, but reveal the true scope of the plan against Meghan. Because what came next wasn't just about denying titles. It was about cutting Meghan's family out of the monarchy's future entirely, and the revelation would leave the world stunned. How quickly can a public announcement turn into a cultural earthquake? Within minutes of King Charles declaring that Archie and Lilibet would not receive royal titles, the reaction spread like wildfire across the globe. Phones lit up. News anchors scrambled. Social media erupted. The entire world suddenly had an opinion on the fate of two children who hadn't even reached school age. What had started as a carefully worded statement became a full-blown spectacle, and the fallout was unlike anything the palace had seen since the death of Diana. Picture the scene. In Britain, television screens filled with breaking news banners. The BBC interrupted programming. ITV convened panels of royal experts. Tabloids rushed special editions to print. In America, cable networks plastered Meghan's face across the screen, framing her as the wronged mother or the manipulative schemer, depending on which channel you tuned into. Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram became battlegrounds. Hashtags trended within minutes. Hashtag Justice for Archie. Hashtag No Titles for Sussex Kids. Hashtag Charles the Ruthless. And the irony? Charles had spoken with the intention of clarity, hoping to close the chapter once and for all. Instead, his words opened a Pandora's box of rage, grief, and disbelief. Let's focus on Britain first. Many traditional royalists applauded the decision. They saw it as necessary, a line drawn firmly in the sand. Why should Harry and Meghan's children benefit, they argued, when their parents have rejected the monarchy, insulted the institution, and cashed in on its name? To this group, Charles wasn't being cruel. He was being decisive. A king finally proving he had the steel spine critics had long accused him of lacking. But the other side of Britain saw it differently. Ordinary families, mothers especially, were moved by the idea of two children being publicly rejected by their own grandfather. They saw the decision as cold, as heartless, as Charles sacrificing blood for crown. Callers flooded into radio stations, some in tears, saying they couldn't believe the monarchy had stooped so low. The line between monarchy and morality blurred instantly, and Charles's image took a hit among those who had once admired his softer, more grandfatherly side. Now crossed the Atlantic. In America, the narrative leaned heavily in Meghan's favor. She was once again framed as Diana 2.0, the outsider crushed by a ruthless institution. Talk show hosts blasted Charles, painting him as a man more concerned with optics than with family. Celebrities began posting messages of support. Hollywood, Meghan's home turf, rallied behind her. And in California, Meghan no doubt watched these reactions closely, seeing not just outrage but opportunity. But here's the twist. The reaction wasn't simply divided between monarchists and Meghan supporters. There was a third camp, a quieter, more skeptical group, who began asking uncomfortable questions. If Meghan truly didn't care about titles, as she had once claimed, why was this decision causing such visible distress? Why was she, through carefully placed sources, allowing the narrative to circulate that she was devastated? Hadn't she said Archie and Lilibet deserved a normal childhood? This group saw hypocrisy, contradiction, and spin, and their skepticism grew louder with each passing hour. Meanwhile, the media frenzy fed on itself. Headlines screamed betrayal. Some tabloids suggested Charles had been manipulated by William and Camilla. Others claimed Meghan's Hollywood allies were preparing a coordinated response. Even more sensational outlets began hinting at leaks, documents, recordings, emails that would reveal just how bitter the behind-the-scenes discussions had been. And through it all, one detail fueled the storm more than any other: the fact that Charles had made the announcement on air, not buried in a press release, not whispered in a palace briefing. On air, public, direct. That decision, more than the content itself, sent shockwaves across the globe. Because it wasn't just policy, it was personal. Now let's add another emotional beat. Imagine Meghan in Montecito, pacing back and forth, phone in hand, watching headlines pile up. She had always prided herself on controlling the narrative. From Oprah to Netflix, she set the stage, she directed the story. But this time, Charles had ripped that control away. She couldn't spin his words. She couldn't reinterpret them. The king had spoken, and the world had listened. For Meghan, that loss of control was as painful as the loss of the titles themselves. And then came the leaks. Within days, stories began surfacing of Meghan's alleged private meltdown. Insiders whispered about shouting matches, slammed doors, frantic phone calls to Hollywood executives, and desperate pleas to allies in the media. Whether true or exaggerated, the image was powerful, Meghan unraveling while the palace projected calm authority. The contrast only deepened the divide in public opinion. Do you see the irony here? Meghan's nightmare wasn't just Charles's decision. It was the reaction to it. Because the more people debated, the more Archie and Lilibet became pawns in a game much bigger than themselves. Every tweet, every panel discussion, every headline dragged their names deeper into the firestorm. Meghan wanted them to be recognized as royals. Instead, they became symbols of rejection, controversy, and scandal. And what about Harry? The public's eyes turned to him with even greater scrutiny. Would he stand by Meghan and rage against his father? Would he defend Charles's choice, however reluctantly? Or would he stay silent, caught between loyalty to his wife and love for his father? Every glance, every word, every silence became a headline. And as Harry hesitated, the pressure grew unbearable. Now here's where the story takes another twist. Amid the chaos, palace insiders allegedly fed a quiet but devastating narrative to select journalists that the decision wasn't just about slimming down the monarchy, but about protecting it from exploitation. That Archie and Lilibet's titles were denied not because of who they were, but because of how their parents had behaved. Imagine the sting of that implication. That Meghan and Harry, through their actions, had cost their children their birthright. That Charles hadn't punished the children, he had punished the parents. And the world ate it up. Talk shows debated whether Meghan and Harry had brought this on themselves. Commentators dissected every interview, every podcast, every documentary for proof that the couple had crossed lines that left Charles no choice. And while Meghan's supporters screamed injustice, a growing number of voices whispered, maybe this is fair. The contradictions multiplied. Meghan's narrative of victimhood clashed with the palace's narrative of accountability. The public was caught in the middle, pulled back and forth between sympathy and skepticism. And through it all, Archie and Lilibet became the faces of a global tug-of-war. But here's the cliffhanger. Because while Meghan was scrambling in Montecito and Charles was standing firm in London, another player was quietly making moves. Someone inside the palace who saw an opportunity in the chaos. Someone who believed Meghan's reaction could be turned against her in a way that would silence her once and for all. Because the next revelation wasn't just about titles. It was about a secret plan. One designed to erase Meghan's influence entirely, and it would leave her reeling in ways she had never anticipated. What happens when Hollywood collides with the crown? When palace intrigue spills into Beverly Hills boardrooms and red carpet circles? That's exactly what unfolded in the aftermath of King Charles's announcement. Meghan Markle, furious and humiliated, turned to the world she knew best, the world of Hollywood, for support. But even there, she discovered a new kind of betrayal. Think about Meghan's trajectory. She left the monarchy but didn't leave the spotlight. Instead, She transformed herself into a hybrid figure, half royal, half celebrity. Netflix deals, Spotify podcasts, glossy interviews. She built a second career out of her royal connection. Hollywood wasn't just her refuge, it was her battlefield. But after Charles's decision, Meghan wasn't approaching Hollywood as a duchess with power. She was approaching it as a mother who had just been publicly stripped of her children's royal future. And that difference changed everything. Insiders say Meghan immediately picked up the phone. Calls to producers, calls to agents, calls to high-powered allies she thought would rally behind her. The message was clear. She needed to frame Charles's decision as cruel, as unjust, as proof of the prejudice she had always warned about. And at first, some in Hollywood sympathized. There were hushed conversations in Beverly Hills mansions, quiet nods of agreement that the monarchy had gone too far. But then came the hesitation. Executives asked hard questions. Would siding with Meghan mean alienating audiences in Britain, where the monarchy still held sway? Would investing in Meghan's narrative actually pay off, or had public fatigue already set in? After all, her Spotify deal had collapsed. Her Netflix content hadn't generated the cultural tidal wave she promised. Was Meghan still the star she believed herself to be? Or was she becoming a liability? Do you see the contradiction? Meghan had thought Hollywood would always embrace her, but Hollywood is ruthless. It doesn't run on sympathy, it runs on profit. And when Meghan began pitching her pain as content, some of her allies grew cautious. One producer allegedly asked, "Is there any story left to tell that the world hasn't already heard?" Imagine Meghan's fury at that question. In her mind, this wasn't about overexposure. It was about injustice. But to Hollywood, it was about ratings. And here's where the betrayal cuts even deeper. While Meghan scrambled to rally support, palace insiders were allegedly feeding information to the press that painted her meltdown as manipulative. Leaks about Meghan's Hollywood crisis calls appeared in tabloids within days. Someone was watching her. Someone was listening. Someone inside the palace, or perhaps even inside her own circle, was turning her desperate outreach into ammunition against her. Can you imagine the paranoia? Meghan had built her entire identity around controlling her image, yet suddenly she was losing control in every direction. The palace framed her as unstable. Hollywood whispered that she was overexposed, and the public watched, fascinated, as her world seemed to cave in from both sides. Now let's add another emotional beat, Harry. Reports suggest that while Meghan was raging in Montecito, Harry sat in silence, withdrawn, unsure of what to do. He had burned bridges with his family. He had sacrificed military titles, royal duties, and public respect. And for what? To see his children denied the very honors Meghan had promised they would one day hold? The guilt weighed heavily on him. Sources claim he told a friend, "Maybe we pushed too far." If that's true, imagine the tension in that Montecito mansion. Meghan pushing for revenge, Harry drowning in regret. And yet, Meghan refused to back down. She allegedly began sketching out her counterattack, a new documentary focused entirely on Archie and Lilibet's lost titles. She wanted the world to see them not as ordinary children, but as victims of a system that punished them for who their parents were. Can you see the strategy? If the monarchy denied her children legitimacy, she would manufacture it through sympathy. Titles and law didn't matter. Titles and the court of public opinion did. But here's the twist. Just as Meghan prepared this comeback, a shocking revelation hit the press. Palace insiders hinted that Charles's decision wasn't merely about slimming down the monarchy. It was part of a larger, coordinated plan, a plan to ensure that Harry and Meghan's children would never, under any circumstance, be able to re-enter the royal fold. That's right, not just a temporary snub, a permanent erasure. This revelation sent Meghan spiraling. To her, it wasn't just a denial of titles. It was an attempt to write her children out of history. The idea that future history books might mention George, Charlotte, and Louis, but not Archie and Lilibet, was unbearable. She saw it as a declaration of war. And so, she turned to her last weapon, exposure. Meghan allegedly began threatening that if the palace didn't reverse course, she would release private recordings, letters, and documents that painted Charles, Camilla, and William in a damning light. Imagine the audacity of that move. A showdown between a Hollywood duchess and the British monarchy, with the reputation of the crown hanging in the balance. But here's the irony. The more Meghan pushed, the more Hollywood pulled away. Executives whispered that she was becoming too risky. Every project comes with baggage, one insider reportedly said, and the baggage is starting to outweigh the story. For Meghan, who had once been courted by Netflix and Spotify with massive contracts, this shift was devastating. The contradictions kept piling up. Meghan claimed she wanted peace, yet every move escalated the feud. She claimed she wanted privacy, yet every plan revolved around publicity. She claimed to protect her children, yet every strategy used them as pawns. The public began to notice. And once that perception takes hold, it's hard to shake. So where does this leave Meghan? Alone in Montecito, surrounded by wealth, but starved of the one thing she craves most, legitimacy. Hollywood is cooling. The palace is stonewalling. Harry is doubting. And her children, the very center of this storm, are growing up in the shadows of a battle they never chose. But here's the cliffhanger. Because just when Meghan thought she had been cornered, a surprising figure stepped forward. Someone she didn't expect. Someone with enough power to shift the balance of this war in her favor, or to destroy her completely if she made the wrong move. Because what happened next wasn't just about Meghan versus Charles. It was about alliances forming, loyalties shifting, and secrets that had been buried for years finally bubbling to the surface. And when those secrets came out, the world would never look at the royal family, or Meghan Markle, the same way again. What happens when loyalty collides with survival? When a man torn between his wife and his bloodline finally realizes that one choice could cost him everything. That's the place Prince Harry found himself in after King Charles's announcement. For Meghan, the denial of Archie and Lilibet's titles was a nightmare. For Harry, it was something even darker. It was the breaking point of a lifelong struggle. Think about Harry's journey. He was born into privilege, but raised in trauma. The image of a 12-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin is seared into the collective memory of the world. From that moment on, Harry's life became a battle between rebellion and duty. He was the spare, the one who could be wild, the one who could break rules. But when he married Meghan, that rebellion took on a new dimension. It wasn't just about Harry anymore. It was about building a new life, a new family, outside the palace gates. But now, with Charles's decision, Harry was forced to face a brutal reality. His rebellion had consequences, and those consequences had fallen squarely on the shoulders of his children. Imagine the guilt. Imagine the weight of knowing that your choices, your words, your anger had led to this outcome. Meghan could blame the palace all she wanted, but deep down, Harry knew the truth. Every interview, every podcast, every book, every accusation, each one was another nail in the coffin of his children's royal future. And yet, Harry didn't know how to stop. Here's the contradiction. Harry had always claimed he left the monarchy to protect his children, to shield them from the pain he endured growing up in the royal spotlight. But now, by fighting so publicly, he had stripped them of the very protections he once had. Do you see the irony? In trying to save them, he may have doomed them. Sources close to the couple say Harry became withdrawn in the days following Charles's announcement. He stopped answering calls from friends. He spent long hours in the garden, staring off into the distance. Meghan, meanwhile, was on the phone constantly, strategizing, raging, planning her counterattack. The divide between them grew visible. One wanted to escalate. The other wanted to retreat. And in that divide, the seeds of deeper conflict were planted. But Harry wasn't just struggling with Meghan. He was struggling with his own family. Imagine the shock of hearing whispers that William had played a role in the decision. That his own brother, the person who once swore they would always face the world together, had influenced their father to cut off his children. The betrayal cut deep. This wasn't just about Charles. It was about William. And for Harry, that realization was unbearable. Ask yourself this. How does a man torn between his wife, his children, and his brother find peace? The answer is, he doesn't. He spirals. And that's exactly what insiders claim happened. Harry began drinking more. He became short-tempered. He lashed out at Meghan in arguments, then apologized in tears. He told friends he felt trapped between the woman he loved and the family he had lost. But here's where the twist comes in. In the middle of his despair, Harry stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to know. A rumor. A whisper. A deal whispered behind closed palace doors that explained everything. The story goes like this. Charles's decision wasn't just about slimming down the monarchy. It wasn't just about punishing Meghan and Harry. It was about William's future. Insiders claim William had made it clear, if Archie and Lilibet were given titles, it would weaken the streamlined monarchy he was set to inherit. Too many royals. Too much confusion. Too much power in the hands of a branch of the family living in California. William wanted clarity, and clarity meant cutting off Meghan and Harry's children completely. Now imagine how that landed with Harry. His own brother, shaping the future, ensuring that Harry's children would have no part in it. To Harry, it felt like betrayal on a scale he couldn't comprehend. William wasn't just protecting the monarchy. He was erasing Harry's legacy. And here's where Harry's contradictions deepened. On one hand, he hated the monarchy, hated the institution that had destroyed his mother and defined his trauma. On the other, he couldn't bear the idea of his children being written out of it entirely. How do you fight for something you despise? How do you want your children to inherit a system you rejected? This was Harry's torment, the emotional spiral that consumed him in those days after Charles's announcement. Now let's focus on Meghan's reaction to Harry's despair. Instead of comforting him, insiders say she pushed harder. She told him that William's betrayal only proved her right, that the monarchy would never accept them, that they had to fight back with everything they had. She urged him to join her counterattack, to stand in front of cameras once again and accuse the palace of cruelty. But Harry hesitated. He told Meghan he was tired. He said, "Every time we speak, we make it worse." That statement sparked a furious argument. Meghan accused Harry of weakness. She said Diana would never have stayed silent. She told him their children's futures depended on him fighting. Harry, overwhelmed, snapped back. "Maybe if we'd stayed quiet, they'd have their titles." Imagine the silence that followed. For Meghan, those words were a dagger. For Harry, they were an admission of guilt. Do you see the storm here? Meghan and Harry weren't just fighting the palace. They were fighting each other. And the children, once again, were caught in the middle. But here's the part no one expected. As Harry wrestled with his guilt, as Meghan plotted her revenge, someone close to the palace leaked details of William's alleged influence over Charles's decision. It wasn't just speculation. It was reported in whispers to journalists, hinted at in headlines. Suddenly, William was being painted as the cold architect of Archie and Lilibet's exclusion. For Harry, this was confirmation. His worst fears realized. His brother wasn't just complicit, he was the driving force. And that knowledge broke something in Harry. He began telling those close to him that William was no longer his brother, that the bond forged in childhood, in grief, in loss, was gone forever, that William had chosen the crown over blood. And once Harry believed that, there was no going back. So where does this leave us? With a man drowning in contradictions. A prince who fled the monarchy but longs for his children to belong to it. A husband torn between supporting his wife and mourning his family. A brother betrayed by the person he once trusted most. And here's the cliffhanger. Because while Harry was spiraling, Meghan was preparing something that would drag him even deeper into the storm. A plan that would force Harry to choose sides once and for all. And this time, the choice would not just cost him his family. It could cost him his marriage. Because what Meghan did next wasn't just a counterattack. It was an ultimatum. And Harry's response would shock the world. What happens when the quiet rivalries inside a palace turn into full-blown warfare? When whispers behind closed doors become louder than royal decrees? Meghan thought Charles's decision was her biggest battle, but in truth, her real adversaries were standing closer to the throne, Camilla and William. They weren't just background players. They were architects, strategists, and in Meghan's eyes, co-conspirators who had played a decisive role in slamming the door shut on Archie and Lilibet. Let's start with Camilla. The Queen Consort has always been a lightning rod of controversy. For decades, she was painted as the villain in Diana's tragic story. She lived in the shadows, endured headlines branding her the other woman, and was once the most hated woman in Britain. But Camilla survived. She outlasted the fury, outmaneuvered the critics, and eventually secured her crown. How? By keeping her head down, playing the long game, and never letting public scandal dictate her strategy. Now compare that to Meghan. Loud, emotional, quick to rage, quick to speak. Meghan wanted change overnight. Camilla, by contrast, spent years waiting for her chance. The contrast between these two women is stark, and for Charles, the difference mattered. To him, Camilla was proof that patience and loyalty could restore honor. Meghan, in his eyes, was proof that rebellion and haste led only to chaos. So when the decision about Archie and Lilibet's titles loomed, whose voice do you think carried more weight? The woman who stood by his side for decades, or the daughter-in-law who stormed out of Britain throwing grenades? Insiders say Camilla advised Charles firmly, no titles. To her, it was simple. Meghan had insulted the crown. She had humiliated Charles in interviews. She had cast Camilla herself as a villain in Harry's memoir, Spare. Granting titles to Meghan's children would be nothing less than rewarding betrayal. Camilla's influence, subtle but powerful, became one of the invisible hands guiding Charles's decision. Now, let's bring William into the frame. William isn't just Charles's son, he's the future king. Every move Charles makes is shadowed by how it will affect William's reign. And William, according to multiple insiders, was adamant. The monarchy must be slimmed down, streamlined, sharpened for survival. Too many royals equals too many scandals. Too many scandals equals a weakened institution. To William, it was logical. Archie and Lilibet, living in California, raised outside the monarchy, could not be part of its official future. But here's the sting. William's stance wasn't just about strategy. It was personal. He has never forgiven Meghan for the rift she caused between him and Harry. He has never forgotten the accusations, the interviews, the Oprah bombshell that cast Kate in a negative light. For William, cutting off Archie and Lilibet wasn't just about slimming down the monarchy. It was about drawing a permanent line. His family on one side, Harry's on the other. Do you see the pattern? Meghan thought her battle was with Charles, but the forces pushing against her were broader, deeper, and more ruthless than she ever imagined. Camilla, protecting her crown. William, protecting his future. Both united in the belief that Meghan's children could not be allowed to wear titles that tied them to the monarchy. And here's the contradiction. Meghan often painted herself as Diana's heir, as the woman standing against the cold institution. But in this story, it was Camilla and William, Diana's old rival and Diana's own son, who worked together against Meghan. Isn't that ironic? The woman Diana hated most, and the son Diana adored most, both shaping the destiny of Diana's grandchildren by Meghan. Now imagine Meghan's fury when she realized this. To her, it wasn't just rejection, it was betrayal on every level. Betrayal by Charles, betrayal by Camilla, betrayal by William. Every door she once thought she might pry open was slammed shut, bolted from the inside. And the rage, insiders say, was volcanic. She told confidants that Camilla was jealous, that William was cruel, that the entire palace was conspiring to erase her children. She framed it as a vendetta, a plot hatched not from strategy, but from spite. But let's pause here and ask, is that entirely true? Or is it possible that, to the palace, this wasn't personal at all? Could it be that Charles, Camilla, and William genuinely believed that granting Archie and Lilibet titles would weaken the monarchy's image, confuse the line of succession, and blur the boundaries between royals and celebrities? It's a question that cuts to the heart of this story. Was this a conspiracy against Meghan, or simply the cold logic of monarchy in survival mode? Regardless of motive, the outcome was the same. Meghan was enraged, Harry was devastated, and Archie and Lilibet became the casualties of palace strategy. But the drama didn't stop there. Because once the public realized Camilla and William's fingerprints were all over the decision, the narrative took on a new life. Tabloids ran headlines about a Camilla-William pact. Social media exploded with debates about William betraying his brother. Memes flooded the internet, painting Camilla as the queen of scheming. Meghan didn't even need to say much. Public imagination did the work for her. And yet, Meghan wasn't satisfied. Rage alone wasn't enough. She needed action. She needed revenge. Insiders say she began exploring ways to expose Camilla and William directly. She considered interviews where she would hint at Camilla's past scandals. She weighed revealing private conversations with William that would cast him as cold and calculating. Meghan was ready to go nuclear, but Harry hesitated. He was torn. Betrayed by William, yes, but also terrified of escalating further. He knew that once Meghan attacked William and Camilla publicly, reconciliation would be impossible. It would burn the last bridge. But Meghan pushed harder. She told him, "They left us no choice. Either we fight, or we disappear." The stage was set for a showdown. Meghan, fiery and unrelenting, ready to wage war. Harry, broken and conflicted, caught between his wife and his blood. And across the ocean, Camilla and William stood firm, confident that the crown had already won this battle. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. Just as Meghan prepared her counterattack, a new piece of information surfaced, one that shifted the entire battlefield. Because what Meghan discovered wasn't just about Camilla and William's influence. It was about a hidden conversation, a deal whispered in the corridors of the palace, a deal that revealed just how far the monarchy was willing to go to keep Archie and Lilibet out. And when Meghan learned the details of that deal, her fury turned into something else entirely: fear. Because what came next wouldn't just be about titles. It would be about survival.